Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the 203rd episode of Open Up, a live podcast simulcasting on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, where we engage with important and influential figures on critical social issues. Hi, my name is Dipchand Ramcharitar, Outreach and Development Coordinator at Voice of Men 360. We are based in London, Ontario, Canada, and essentially advocate for and try to uplift men and boys in our communities. We also reach out to other demographics as best we can. We are affiliated with International Men's Day, which has been serving for more than 25 years in over 95 countries in a similar capacity. Our special guest today is Benjamin Kintisch, music teacher, songwriter, who wrote a new musical comedy inspired by his life as a hospice chaplain. He's here to share his experiences, and insights on death and dying, grieving, hurting, healing, and finding hope, among other things. But before we get to Benjamin, here's our disclaimer. We would like to remind you that Voice of Men 360's mission is always delivered with good faith towards peaceful harmony. The views and opinions expressed in today's episode are those of our speakers and do not necessarily represent Voice of Men 360. Our organization engages in discussion forums to offer inspiration and create awareness of the issues of men who wish to overcome their life challenges. We are not providing medical or therapeutic advice. Should you require that type of assistance, we recommend you contact a medical professional immediately. If you have any questions or concerns about today's episode or any Voice of Men 360 content, please email us at info@voiceofmen360.org. Now on with the show, and we're excited to welcome Benjamin. He wants to be called Ben, so let's go with Ben. To our platform here at Voice of Men 360's Open Up. He's got a big, broad smile on his face. We're all excited for this really special time. So Ben, with a short introduction, can you follow that up by what inspired you to create a musical comedy play about death and dying? And how did you come up with such a concept? Ben.
Right. Thanks again for having me on the program, and hello to all of the listeners and viewers out there. So I was a beginner hospice chaplain and training in how to be a chaplain, how to provide pastoral care to people in need. When you train as a chaplain, you typically are assigned to a primary place where you do your hours of training under supervision. My primary place, as it were, was a residential hospice. It was called Center for Hope, and it was in New Jersey. So I was there doing 300 hours of visits spread out over the year, so several hours every day for the entire calendar year, plus a graduate level class. During those visits, I was going room to room, having these beautiful conversations with residents, that is patients in their end of life time at the hospice, and their loved ones. So these bedside conversations included some sharing of stories that were really powerful and memorable. I decided to take those stories and turn them into songs. Now, I'm a lyricist. The words come well and easily to me. I partnered with two wonderful composers, Michael Miller and Jason Spiewak, who paired my words with their music. So that was a co-writing process that happened in the first few years of our project. And then eventually we had enough songs together that I could kind of knit together a story. I wrote the script, and then over years we built it up to have now an ensemble cast, 16
Right.
songs and a full script. There's also a shorter version that's a one-man show that I've been performing more recently. So that's
Okay.
the very quick version of how I made it.
Very, very impressive. And speaking of sharing stories, can you share some of the
Yes.
stories you heard from people who are nearing the end of their life that really stood out to you?
Sure. I'll just share a contrast, right? I met so many people, including very famous or impressive people and, quote, regular people. And their stories, while totally different, were similarly impactful. One favorite patient who I fictionalized and feature in the play was a very elderly African-American fellow who was a church musician for many decades. He played in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and he shared about the joy of playing music for hundreds and thousands of people in big churches all over the most populous borough of New York City. He also he and I became friendly over many months of visits, and our real life relationship I kind of fictionalized into what happens in the play. But one thing that I remember in the real life version was he was a retired musician, so he was able to give me some playful grief about my guitar playing. He teased me for using a capo instead of doing bar chords. If you're a guitarist, you know what that means. And, it kind of inverted the normal power dynamic. When you visit and you're the caregiver and they're the patient in the bed, you kind of expect that the visitor is the one who's in charge, the one who's in power. And so when he showed me his expertise as the real musician in the room, it kind of was a playful move and it upended expectations. So that's a memory that I remember, not just because it ended up inspiring characters and interactions in the show, but also it's a reminder that no matter the kind of life a person lives, whether they're famous and impressive or, quote, just a regular person, we all have interesting stories that can be impactful. And also, even in our old age and our convalescence, we still have knowledge and expertise to offer.
Yeah, you're right about that. It doesn't matter your status, your ethnicity, whatever the case might be. We all have interesting stories to share,
Yes.
one way or the other. So it makes life, worthwhile and very interesting. And
Sure.
now I know you have this really impressive play out there. So and it has a certain degree of humor to it. How do you think we can use humor to cope with difficult topics like death and grief?
It's a great question and one I love to play with. I sometimes call myself a sad clown as a way to name my persona. And I think there is a pretty obvious, heavy current of mental illness, especially depression and anxiety, among accomplished comedians and comic writers. I listen to the podcast Mark Maron's WTF, and he interviews a lot of comics, and they talk about dark stuff a lot. I don't need to go too far down that direction, but I think it's worth saying that a lot of entertainers, myself being an entertainer and a comedian of a type, we like to laugh, maybe because we have a lot of sadness in us, and it's a fast way to get a hit of adrenaline or dopamine. Like I've had the experience of singing for a room and moving people to tears or to joyful applause. I've also told jokes and gotten a room to laugh. And I'll tell you, whether it's clapping or laughter, it's a similar rush. So I think a lot of us sad clowns pursue that adulation of the crowd and so forth. I'll tell you in terms of the message, though, I often invoke the Mary Poppins song, takes a spoonful of sugar to make the medicine go down. You know that one?
Yeah.
it was told to me early on by an important mentor, songwriter friend, Sue Horowitz. She had heard an early version of a song that was beautiful, and it's a tearjerker, a power ballad that makes everyone cry. She
Right.
said, okay, you know how to make a sad song. You need to also make a funny song and a happy song, maybe a sexy song, a surprising song, an angry song, because a good musical, it hits all of those emotional notes. You
Yeah.
can't just have sad ballads because people, they won't come back after intermission. So with that in mind, I wrote some funny songs, including a funny opening number. The full-length show has a great and rather raunchy R&B song where all the patients are lusting after the care team. So comedy songs are part of it. And then in the dialogue, we have a lot of very funny banter. One of my heroes is Neil Simon, who does a lot of witty back and forth. So I try to emulate that. And the truth is, people are surprised that hospice is a place that is funny. But the thing is, it's funny because it's filled with people and people are funny. So I try to capture that in both dialogue and song.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And speaking of, there should obviously be some sort of balance.
Yes.
And you've got to be very careful when it comes to something, let's say, for example, like a funeral service.
Yes.
About what you say. Now, I have been to some eulogies and people were laughing, they were cracking up, but it was done in good taste and respectful of the deceased somewhat and the families and whatnot. So on that theme, your play seems to tackle some very heavy themes, obviously,
For sure.
but it's a comedy. How do you balance the tone to make it both funny and respectful?
I'll say the short answer is lots and lots of rewrites.
Yeah.
The project is literally in its 12th year. I feel like the script and the songs are pretty well cooked, so to speak. But I'll also tell you as a playwright, the next time I do a workshop, I'm going to be going home and taking notes and making edits. Like, that's just the process of being a playwright, because every time you see it, you're going to want to make changes. Say your question once more for me, friend.
Sure.
Oh, finding the balance between the funny and the sad.
Yeah. How do you balance that tone to make it both
right
funny and respectful?
Okay. So because I'm a comedian as sort of one of my personas, I tend to feel like comedy is a great way to be a truth teller, to wrestle with tricky stuff. I mentioned Mark Maron as an example of this. A few years ago, his partner, Lynn Shelton, died suddenly. And then his podcast got dark for a while, where he was like really wrestling with grief on air. That wasn't really a comedy moment, but he's since talked about grief and death quite a lot in his comedy specials to great effect and rather effectively. I like to think that in Life Review, we use comedy as a pressure release,
right?
In a way that helps us be ready to open our hearts again. Because every time I sing a power ballad, or a member of my cast does, and they're talking about life after death or missing their loved ones, we know, because I've seen it live in person, that a lot of people are literally going to be crying. So it's important for me to know that 10 minutes later, I have a laugh line in the script, so they can, like, it's not jolt back into, but it's to kind of find equilibrium. So I'm a music teacher, and I teach my students that we all ride this roller coaster of emotions in life.
Yeah.
And when you're going through intense grief moments, your roller coaster may still have up and downs, but the whole ride is a little bit lower. So with that in mind, in my show, I mentioned earlier the advice of Sue Horowitz about having variety. So variety is a way to modulate feeling, because a power ballad gives a different feeling than a vaudeville comedy number, which is different from R&B, which is different from a song that sounds like Frank Sinatra, or a gospel number, right? Those all immediately bring to mind feelings without me telling you any of the words of the content. So we use that musical technique to vary that. But you asked about respect. So I believe strongly that good comedy focuses on important truths and is not about insult or bringing people down. And my show is generally positive and uplifting, even as we have a healthy and funny acknowledgement of death, dying, mortality, injury, disability, aging. Like, those are facts of life. We play with them, but we don't do so in a way that's ever disrespectful.
Yeah, makes sense. How do you think your work on death now? We are a men and boys advocacy group, so the next 2 or 3 questions would be based around men and boys specifically.
I'm
How
ready.
do you think your work on death, dying, and grief can help men and boys cope with the societal expectations around masculinity and emotional expressions?
Great question. So I'm generally of the opinion that many of the stereotypes about men, especially straight cisgender men, are true when it comes to avoiding help. You know, the famous example is a man in a car would rather be lost for half an hour than stop and ask for directions. So that is a literal funny thing. I actually happen to be a different kind of man. I'm happy to stop for directions. And yes, I have the phone, which gives directions. But that has now become more of a metaphor, as in a lot of men would rather bumble in their own attempts to try to do stuff and fix stuff rather than admit that they have some humility, they have some fallibility, and they need help, right? And this is especially true and dangerous, unfortunately, in the field of mental health. So one of the reasons why I was excited to connect with you gentlemen and be on your program is I think my play is not just a good play for the general public, but that there are some interesting issues about men and masculinity that we deal with, right? Primarily that the main character, a man who looks like me, yes, I play him, he is a man who's like middle-aged, but he's struggling mightily with grief, unresolved grief. His parents have died in the last few years. And he's a little lonely. He's kind of a bachelor. It's not really clear what's the story there, but he's lost. And at first, he tries to outsmart his way. He knows that he's clever and he wants to teach and preach, and that turns out to be a disaster. And what he really needs to do is find some humility to step back and listen to people's stories. That's the chaplain lesson. But more importantly, on his emotional growth, it's late in the play when he really allows himself to be cracked open emotionally. And that's an important part of his story arc, because to acknowledge, like, a lot of hero journeys that have a man, they go away and come back. That's the Odysseus, right? Or in the American story, the myth, there's like a man who's a builder or a tycoon, from nothing to millionaire, that kind of thing. There's this cowboy myth with a lot of fighting and violence. I'm not a fan.
Yeah.
So my hero may be a little bit of an anti-hero. He's not slick. He's not that bold. In fact, we find him at the beginning on his knees, literally and metaphorically. He's digging bulbs, planting flowers in memory of his deceased parents.
Okay.
And we learn that he is the well-meaning but ineffectual new chaplain. Now, what does this have to do with men? Well, he's a man who's trying his best to do well, but he has to stumble pretty badly before he realizes how much he needs help. And he may successfully find help from the colleague, the nurse, and he learns to listen better, which, for a lot of men is tricky. He's really lonely and sad, and there's no indication in the script whether or not he seeks therapy, whether he takes pharmaceutical drugs, whether he self-medicates. That's kind of vague. We don't know. But it's clear that he's sad. And it's clear that he's not sure about finding his way. Now, take it off the stage. We all know so many men who are struggling with grief or other mental health challenges and just choose never to go to a therapist.
Yeah.
They may choose not to ever avail themselves of commonly prescribed medicines to deal with anxiety and depression for the number one and number two most treatable mental health ailments. I mean, I'm a guy proud to say I take anxiety medicine every day, and a very powerful pill at that. And then I have bonus as needed, generic Xanax, basically. And I don't always use it, but it's available. I recently had a difficult work situation, and I used it, and I was glad I had it available. But like, I think it's important that men, whether fictional on stage or in real life, are okay with the fact that they go through loss, that they love people and lose them, that they age and they become disabled and less powerful in different ways, and yet they can still live fulfilling lives all the way to the end, and if necessary, get help from others.
So that was a bit of a lengthy answer, but I guess deservedly
Maybe
so.
I covered three.
It's a very complicated issue concerning men and boys. I'm very interested with the next question to see what the answer is. And this question is, in your experience working with people nearing the end of their life, have you noticed any common themes or regrets that men specifically express?
Two different questions built into one, and I'll try to answer them quickly. Themes are all over the place. Some people want to do that life review interview just talking about everything that happened in their life, because at the end of your life, everything that happened is important. So sharing your story with its highlights and maybe with some important details, some important apocryphal stories, that's going to be important to you. I'll tell you that for men of different generational groups, I heard different kinds of stories more. So like when I worked with men that we call in America the boomers, those who came of age in the shadow of World War II, some of them, like their big brothers were World War II veterans. So for them, talk of World War II or maybe Vietnam era service was very important if that was when they came of age, right? For others that were different ages, some of the themes had like historical echoes, right? Like they remember when all the Kennedys were getting killed and the assassinations of the 60s.
Right.
In terms of themes, look, I think because I'm a chaplain, I heard a lot of theological themes, and people wrestle with what did it all mean? You know, did my life matter? I think that's a common one. And then, of course, there's always relational stuff, which cannot be overstated in importance. It's not necessarily my place in the world, but who loved me and who did I love? And are those people, if they're still alive, are they going to come see me before I die? If I have, unfortunately, a lot of men have fights over their life and relationship fissures. I mean, women, that happens too, but I think for men, deciding to, quote, take a break from someone is a more common reaction. So I often would counsel people, male and female, but dealing with, let's call it relationships on pause or estrangement. So that was tough to see, but not uncommon and unfortunately somewhat prevalent among men.
Right. Very interesting. What advice would you give to men and boys who are struggling to open up about their emotions or vulnerabilities, and how can they start to build a more meaningful connections with others?
Jeez. It's not fair to give me 2 minutes for a question that big. You'll have to invite me another time, and we'll just talk social emotional learning.
Yeah, just briefly, and yes, obviously we will have you back.
So let's start where it's easiest and not expect men and boys to go deep quickly, because that's not their nature. So if you're trying to help a boy like your son or nephew, start with media that they love. So movies that they love, songs and music that they love, video games that they love, and then experience the ups and downs of the emotion in enjoying that media. And then you can also talk about the emotion as exhibited by the characters in the media. So let's take, for example, you love video games. So we know a lot of big video games have immersive stories. So that story may have an arc of excitement, and then there's a fight, and if you lose, you're disappointed, right? So there's all these emotional words that you can use to talk about the video game experience that's often derided as brainless and brain melting. No, it can be exciting for the player, like, oh, were you excited about the game? Were you disappointed that you couldn't beat the boss? But then also, if it's a game with narrative, to go in. Now, that's easier for actually narrative formats, as in books, movies, and television shows. And again, you can experience it and talk about it with your male people, your men and boys. What do we experience together enjoying this music, this TV, this movie? And then let's talk about the emotions experienced by the characters. So to take a funny example, The Simpsons, even though it's ridiculous satire, there's a lot of emotional ups and downs in every 30-minute episode. So you could talk to your little boy if he loves Bart. You know, Bart often acts very bold, but sometimes he has intense shame. He gets embarrassed. Or his dad is embarrassing, and you could be like, are you ever embarrassed by me? You know, and like, so basically use the TV as a way to bridge into conversations about emotions that might be tricky otherwise. That's my tip. The other one is be creative, write and draw, and that's a good way to get emotions out there.
Excellent advice. Now, this is something that again, this is one of the more interesting things I want to hear what you have to say.
Let's go.
How do you think we can better support people who are grieving, and what are some common misconceptions about the grieving process?
Okay, I'll take number 2 first. That's easier. Common misconceptions is that it's linear, and that because there have been steps described about the steps in grief, that one ought to move through those steps in a methodical and sequential pattern. That is a myth, right? The author who wrote about the steps of grieving, she was initially writing about anticipatory grief, as in what the people go through in the bed as they think about their own demise or the demise of their loved ones.
Right.
It was later more broadly applied to grief after someone dies. Interesting historical detail. But that's important to note because real life grief is never as simple, direct, systematic, or predictable as anything written in a book, right? So number 1 to know about grieving is it's not going to be predictable. It won't be linear. If a straight road like a highway is your example of straight, I think grief looks more like meandering path in a forest with ups and downs and zigzags and maybe stumbling roots and rocks that you trip over and it hurts. And then other moments where it's beautiful. I mean, that's the thing about grief that I think has surprised me a lot, is that the grief journey can be beautiful and revelatory. 3 or 4 years ago, I lost a dear friend, a music teacher who I idolized, was kind of like a stand-in father figure. And when I heard the news of his death, I was devastated. And at his funeral, I eulogized him and I cried, and I still have his picture at my desk. His name was Mr. Hughes, Mr. Bert Hughes. May his memory be for a blessing. But I bring him up not just to mention that I have also lost people, but to note that while the initial loss was devastating, I now bring joy and inspiration in invoking his memory. I look at his picture on my desk, and yes, I miss him, and I sometimes wish I could talk to him because he was a hero. But I also feel joy for having known him, and I feel like I've come to a place of healing. Not everyone gets there in only a few years, but we can find a place of resolution and healing.
Excellent. So that's for a lot of people who are going through grief. We've touched on, for example, people nearing death. What about people in the prime of their lives? What advice would you give listeners who are struggling to find meaning or purpose in their own lives?
Well, first, it should be noted that grief and the powerful feelings that go with grief and grieving happen not just about death, but major life changes. So if you have a job that you love and you leave it, you may grieve for it. Many 22-year-olds go through the acute symptoms of grieving having left college or university because it's such a fun time of life. Men in particular are often unaware of the emotional impact of these life changes. So let's just start by naming that, guys, right? Like when you go from one part of your life to the next, it may hurt. And whether you call it grieving or just saying, oh, it sucks leaving college, let's name it and then figure out how to deal with that pain. You know, part of it a lot of times is you grieve community, right? So to take the example of leaving college or a job, you miss those people. So part of the grief process is to say, like, I miss that group. How can I find my people again? And it's probably going to be a new group of people. I should also say that for men who feel youngish, and I'm saying that broadly, so I don't know, men from age 18 to 50, just as a group, we often feel relatively impervious to death and dying because we don't feel that old yet. But the older generation certainly is getting older. So I like to teach that even if you're 18, the prime of your virility and strength, your grandparents are getting ready to die because that's just how the generations turn over. I'm 45. I look a little younger, especially if I trim my beard short. But I have the aches and pains of a guy in his 40s. So like my body reminds me of my mortality. And I think a lot of guys in middle age, we want to feel younger and our body is signaling to us that things are changing.
Right.
And we don't want, you know, our grandparents are now all deceased when you're in your 40s, unless it's like a crazy thing, right?
Yeah.
But now we're in the sandwich generation. So even if we're not thrilled to deal with grief, we are going to go through it because our parents are aging and will die.
Right.
And I mentioned in passing my former teacher, he's about the age of my parents. So like, if it's not your own parents, it's people who matter of that generation who are dying. So we are grieving whether or not we want to anticipate it. And yes, it's a process. And yes, we will need help, or rather we may benefit from help. How's that?
Absolutely. So we are winding down. I have a couple questions before we close off. So let's get to what's next for you. What projects do you have? And do you have any future performances or collaborations in mind?
Wonderful. So Life Review, the hospice musical, which is the show I'm promoting today, is currently taking engagements for the next 18 months. So if you're seeing me today and you're curious about the show, please check out the website and you can get in touch. I'm also active on Instagram at Life Review Musical. Send me a DM. I will write you back. So we are making plans for me doing the one-man show. I travel. I'm doing fringe festivals. I'm applying for grants and fellowships. I have a plan for 9 months out to do a public performance of the full show, concert style, with live musicians. That's meant to be in May 2026 with musicians from Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore. And there will be some fundraising towards that. I'm also doing a new show rather, called Bird Feeder, the musical. And that'll be a little more whimsical and lighthearted than one about hospice. Though again, I swear my show is rather fun and uplifting, even though it's a little heavy at times.
Yeah, I agree. And looking as there are some exciting times ahead for you. I've got one final question, but before we get to that, I have some further information about our organization. We welcome everyone, regardless of age, gender, sexual orientation, whatever the case, nationality. Everyone is welcome to be part of our group. We have some contact information here. Our phone number is 226-289-8784. Email address is info@voiceofmen360.org. Our website is www.voiceofmen360.org. You can find us on pretty much all social medias. We have a Facebook group page. Please join our group so you can see our daily activities, and of course, invite your friends as well. Other social media platforms we're on: Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Voice of Men 360. We really look forward to having more and more people join us, and share the word, get the word around as to what we do and what we plan to accomplish as time goes on. So we've pretty much get at the end of our show. And Ben, one final question for you. Can you give the listeners any contact information about yourself or your work for those interested in learning more?
Oh, that is the easiest question yet. Thank you. So we have a wonderful website, lifereviewmusical.com, that I want all of the listeners to check out. That is lifereviewmusical.com. I hope I spelled it right. Oh, look at that. That's some good technology. High five to the producer. Wow, he's terrific. The silent man is amazing. Lifereviewmusical.com. Yes, our man Sivam. Shout out to Sivam, the producer. And Instagram at Life Review Musical. Both of those are accurate. Well done. So on Instagram, I put a lot of, photos, videos, selfies at performances, but a lot of behind the scenes stuff. So if you're curious to get a sense of what is it like to have a creative dream, theatrical or otherwise, if you follow me, you'll get a lot of insights into that never-ending adventure. And it is an adventure. And like I said earlier, if you DM me, I'll write back. I'm always interested in connecting with fellow creatives, people who have a dream, especially in writing music, plays, visual arts, whatever. Send me a message. I will be your cheerleader. And the website has a lot of great material. If you've enjoyed hearing me talk, that's true. And that's more a personal page, but yeah, you can see cute pictures of me and my dog. But anyway, it's not secret. But on the website, we have a ton of material. I think more than 30 podcast interviews posted now. I might be up to 40 soon. Yeah. Do a lot of interviews. So if you like hearing me talk, you can hear that again and again and again. And I'm known to break into song on some recordings, so that's fun. There's also a trailer video on that website that I think is quite excellent. It was professionally made, shot with footage from our big workshop performance that happened right before the COVID pandemic shut down live theater. So if you're curious, what does Life Review Musical look like? You can see some footage from our show. And most importantly, our dream, let me put it out there into the world. We want to bring this thing all the way to Broadway. And if you like what you've heard and you want to hear these songs, you want to see it in your community, get in touch. We have the one-man show, and most importantly, the full ensemble show. We want to find theatrical partners. So if you're involved in theater, let's talk.
Right. Fantastic. So for all those people out there, please, give the support. He's thoroughly deserved it. And let's see him on Broadway as soon as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been listening to a fantastic session with a music teacher, songwriter. We call him Benjamin Kintisch. And we have really been impressed. It's been a meaningful and enlightening session. And even though it had some heavy themes, Ben is pretty funny. And it made it all so much more, enjoyable, with all due respect to the themes. And so we were really happy to have you on board. We really appreciate the time you've spent with us. Thank you ever so much. And to our producer, the silent but the most effective and efficient Sivam, our president, thank you so much, Sivam, for everything that you do and making sure everything goes seamlessly. And to the listeners, of course, we really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today, and we hope that you can take away something of substance from this particular podcast. So, from all of us here at Voice of Men 360, thank you again, and have a good night, good evening, good morning. Bye for now.
Thanks a lot.